Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Tenpenny Files. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. The Tenpenny Files has daily conversations that meant to inform, not just to entertain. I come prepared, and we let the discussion unfold naturally with people worth hearing on topics worth exploring. If it matters to your body, your freedom, or your future, we talk about it here. Each day, I talk with authors, documentary filmmakers, and independent thinkers whose work challenges mainstream messaging. We cover a wide range of topics, so there's something here for everyone. We cover government, politics, history, farming, fitness, vaccines, health, and health policy. And once a week, I have a conversation with an author or a pastor who writes about faith and biblical principles. My goal is to introduce you to topics you've never heard of before, or to topics you always wish you had time to explore but didn't know where to begin. Let our authors and our guests show you the way. Join me here every day, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the Tenpenny Files, where we hear from voices that have often been ignored, silenced, or censored, but truly have something important to say. So before we begin, I just want to invite everyone to join us at Tenpenny Prime and become a member. Tenpenny Prime members receive exclusive content every month and an Ask the Expert masterclass that are just over the moon. You can find out more by going to primemembership.drtenpenny.com, primemembership.drtenpenny.com. Learn more about what we do and hopefully join and support our work. And one last thing, I want to say thank you to everybody who's become a regular follower of ours, and welcome to new people who have joined our broadcast. It's great to have you all here. So now let's get started. Today's conversation is with New York Times bestselling author and award-winning talk show host Charles Goyette to talk about his book, The Empire of Lies: Fragments from the Memory Hole, an account of deadly folly, moral failure, war profiteering, and ruthless manipulation of the public. Charles, welcome so much to the Tenpenny Files. It is really, truly an honor to have you here with me today.
Dr. T, it is my honor to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, your book, Empire of Lies, you start out by discussing the shooting down of TWA Flight 800, the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, and proposals of a red flag to start the war in Iraq. Then say, quote, state lies and staged incidents are so common that virtually every international incident deserves to be viewed skeptically. And I totally agree with you about that. How does that play into the current events that are happening around the world today?
The question is so big, it's almost impossible to know where to start when you talk about deceit and misleading. This morning I discovered that President Trump has said, well, we don't have to clear the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm thinking, that's funny. A month ago, it was wide open. There was no war. Gasoline prices were reasonable. We weren't on the precipice of a global economic meltdown. And now all the pretexts that you've given us for going in there have suddenly vanished, but we have to continue the war anyway. So I have a long litany, as you've referred to, Dr. T, of the overt lies that have been emitted from the deep state with regard to Iraq and Iran and a host of regime change wars, of phony wars, and so on. And I identify the culprit in most of them as the backstory. The culprit is what I call the deep state, a common term now, but it's been called the invisible government in the past, the shadow government, and other things. But in my view, it is the executive arm of the global American empire. The global American empire is a global entity of itself, but it is managed, its objectives are fulfilled by the deep state. So I have an account of that in it, and my book is a warning for people to start questioning, corroborating the things that the government says, or we will be marched into these kind of follies one after another until our free republic is finished.
Well, we are really headed forward over there. Now they're talking about putting boots on the ground and blowing up Iran's water system, which I guess is considered a war crime if they do
Yes.
that. And it seems as though we have like no real justification for being there because it seems like they move the goalpost every week. It was, to stop the nuclear bombs, and then, oh, didn't we just bomb them? And so they didn't have any nuclear war. And now it's like, well, they have to go be bombed into submission. And this country has 1,000-year history of being invaded by all sorts of people and recovering. But what does this, why does the our government's foreign policy, why does the goalpost keep moving? And what would U.S. foreign policy look like if we did things differently and didn't just follow the commands of the deep state?
It'll be a world of much more peace and much greater prosperity, especially for the American people. Yeah, it's funny how the goalpost moves all the time. It's always the war is the deep state objectives, and then they get very busy looking for a pretext to justify it. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. In the Iraq War, let me even start with the Gulf War, just because it's so juicy and it should be known. In the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein was our guy. The CIA installed the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. They installed Saddam Hussein effectively. He was our guy. When he wanted to invade Kuwait, he wanted our permission for it because he was our guy, and he went to our ambassador to ask for permission. And she said, "We wash our hands of it. We really don't have much to say about this." So they, when he invaded Kuwait over an oil dispute, slant drilling, and whatever the other inter-Arab issues were, the American people weren't really eager to go into that war. They didn't know why. And so the spinmeisters in the White House started working desperately to find a way to stampede the people into the war, like they always do with all of these kinds of incidents. And the one they came up with, this is juicy. They came up with, well, right now, besides having taken Kuwait, Saddam Hussein has, and I don't remember the numbers, but it was something like 12,000 tanks and 200,000 or 150,000 men on the border of Saudi Arabia. And he's ready to roll in. He's right on the border. He's poised to go any minute. And this will mean the end of Western civilization. No more filling up your tank, no more commuting to work, no more visiting your family on the weekend. It's the end of oil from the Middle East. It's the end of civilization. We have to go to war to stop this. So one enterprising reporter, a woman in St. Petersburg, Florida, asked her publisher to give her $3,200. She went out and hired time on the surveillance satellites and had all the photos taken, all the surveillance photos, and hired the photo analyst to look at the photos of the border area. And they can see everything in the region. They could see American fighters in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, for example. They saw the whole area. But the most peculiar thing is there were no tanks on the border of Saudi Arabia. And there were no soldiers on the border of Saudi Arabia. There were no supply lines. The roads hadn't been used. There were no logistics. There were no places for them to encamp. There were none of it. And so she said, well, this is a pretty big lie to tell the American people. So she started going to the Secretary of Defense and asking for an explanation. And their explanation was, trust us. And she never got another explanation. Then let me jump forward to the next Iraq War, the Iraq War that broke out in 2003. And the American people didn't know exactly why we should be in that war either. But here's what happened. The White House got desperate to find an excuse, a pretext. They're always looking for a pretext to sell the next war. The pretext was this time, and here's how they created it. They had a group inside the White House called the White House Iraq Group. And you would think if, this is about war and nuclear weapons and stuff, they'd have nuclear weapons experts and people, that understand the risk, and they'd be assessing the risk and the reality of the threats. Not so. It was spinmeisters, pollsters, talking points generators. And they got together and they came up with this. It's a marketing phrase that would have done a soft drink well. They said, well, we can't afford to see the smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. Oh, that must mean they have weapons of mass destruction. They have nukes. Yeah, and who wants to see the smoking gun, the final evidence, in the form of a mushroom cloud? So they started marketing that. The president said it. Ari Fleischer said it from the podium in the press room. Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, the whole bunch. Smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. So I could give you a dozen, but just give you one example how they tried to sell that. The deep state, I'm talking about Scooter Libby and Dick Cheney in this case, somebody discovered these aluminum tubes. Oh, these aluminum tubes must be part of a centrifuge operation inside Iraq for refining uranium. This is the final nail in the coffin. We've got them dead to rights. They have these aluminum tubes. They're using it for refining deadly uranium. They're on the verge of a nuclear weapon. Okay. Our own guys in the energy department that deal with aluminum tubes and refining of uranium and hexachlorowood. They said, these tubes don't work. That's not what these are for. They don't fit. They don't configure. They're absolutely not related to that. But nevertheless, Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby packaged this story up about these deadly aluminum tubes. This is the now we've nailed it down. We've got the evidence. They packaged it up and they gave it to the lapdog press. They packaged it up and they gave it to the New York Times. They gave it to Judith Miller at the New York Times, who had been fronting for a liar trying to get us into the war in Iraq for a long time, a guy named Ahmed Chalabi, who was a bank embezzler, but the neocon warmongers wanted to put him in charge of the entire country if we invaded. She'd been fronting and writing his stories as though, he were telling her the truth, which was widely known to have been false. But so anyway, she got the story about the aluminum tubes put on the front page of the Sunday morning New York Times. And that Sunday morning, Dick Cheney showed up on Meet the Press. And he said, nailed it down, aluminum tubes, weapons process, smoking gun, mushroom cloud, weapons of mass destruction, aluminum tubes. But he said, but don't take it from me. Here it is on the front page of the New York Times. So here's the story. The deep state formulates, plants it, runs it to the lapdog press. The lapdog press feeds it back to the deep state. They feed it to the other lapdog press, and they go on TV and say, "Don't. It must be true." The New York Times told the story. I mean, we are led down the primrose path by these people, as you know so well. It's not just in war; it's in your areas of specialty too, over and over and over again. And they're doing it again now.
I remember when all that started, and there was a general that came out early on when we first started, carpet bombing Iraq and doing all the things that we were doing, that said this is going to be a multi-year war and it's going to cost over $100 billion. And everyone scoffed and said, no, it's going to be just a couple of weeks and we're going to destroy their weapons of mass destruction, which we never found and they never had. And it was 20 years at the enormous financial cost and enormous human cost. And looking at these conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan and now Iran, who's ultimately going to pay the price for these wars in terms of taxpayer dollars and the broader global consequences of it?
Yeah, and it's always us. We're always the recipients of the bill at the end of the day, whether it's through inflation or reduced circumstances in some other way. But you mentioned the business about the cost of the war. I saw Secretary of Defense or War Pete Hegseth, I believe it was this morning, saying, "How long does the war last?" Well, we're not going to tell you. Like they know, right? Who knows? But we're not going to tell you. It could be 5 days, and they've done this before. From the beginning of this war, it could be 5 days, 5 weeks. This is exactly to the letter what Donald Rumsfeld was telling us during the Iraq War. It could be 5 days, 5 weeks. I doubt 5 months. The war went on for almost 9 years. And speaking of the cost of the war, I have an incident in my book about that. There was an economist, a chief economist of the Bush administration, a pretty good economist. I read him occasionally. I thought he was, fair for a White House economist. And they asked him going into the war, how much is this war going to cost us? His answer was, well, it could cost us $50 billion. Dr. T, they fired him for saying that. $50 billion was so much. They were furious at him for making the American people think it was going to be that costly. And Dick Cheney ordered him fired, and they fired him. He was an old Bush friend, and they fired him for saying $50 billion. Well, it wasn't 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. The war went on for almost 9 years, and it cost at least $3 trillion. So whatever they say, not just taken with a grain of salt, it must be immediately rejected. And then you have to do some heavy lifting to try to corroborate anything that comes out of the empire of lies.
Wow. In the introduction of your book, Empire of Lies, you use a Mark Twain quote that says, America cannot have an empire abroad and a republic at home. With roughly 800 overseas military bases across 75 countries, we are already an empire abroad. Who's minding the internal destruction of what's happening here with inflation and the trans agenda and all of the fraud that we've uncovered and all of the stuff that Doge was exposing that seems to have just gotten shelved? Who's minding the hen house here?
Nobody is minding the hen house. And the
Wow.
people that we elect as our elected representatives, this is a very peculiar psychological syndrome that these people are climbers, political climbers, all of their lives. They want to get ahead, they want to get appointed, they work on campaigns, they insert themselves into the process. They're looking for political influence. They hope to get elected someday, and maybe they'll get to Congress, and that would be great. And then they get to Congress. There's an old saying that when you send your guy to Congress, somebody you know in the neighborhood or you grew up with or something, when you send him once you send him to Washington, he's not your guy anymore. They don't just sell out; they buy in. But um, nobody is minding the store, in my view. And despite all of the political conventions and speeches and the Labor Day rallies with political figures speaking and all of the stuff on TV, all the things they say about the constitutions, they don't believe a word of it. And our founding fathers were learned people, unlike these people. In fact, they weren't cowardly. When they declared independence, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on in this episode. So when they divided up government, being learned people, they didn't just say, "We're dividing government. We're dividing government because we want to protect your liberties. We don't want anybody amassing too much power here or there, so we'll give a little power here, a little power." But they didn't just say one for you, one for me, one for him, one for you, one for me. They said, knowing the historical precedents, they said, all right, throughout history, the executive branch, be it a duke, a king, a Caesar, a prince, a prime minister, a president, the executive branch has a propensity to engage in unneeded, inelective, and costly wars. Therefore, we take the power for war making away from the president and we give it to the representatives of the people who actually pay for it and die in these wars. And through their representatives, they get to decide. So that's the constitutional system. We haven't had a declaration of war since World War II, although we've had nothing but a succession of wars. And it's not just a formality. If you look at everything that is missing in all of these wars, a good deal of it would have been saved, solved, avoided by a declaration of war. If you look at declarations of war, you specify who the enemy is exactly. It's nothing vague. Who the enemy is, what the objective is, what kind of resources we're going to dedicate to prevailing. How do we know when we prevailed? How do we know when the war is won? How do we know when it's over and we can come back? But we don't have that debate in this country, and we haven't had it for any of our wars since 1941. And so here are these peculiar people that spend their lives trying to amass political influence and power and stuff. But at the first hint, they run away from it. They want deniability. If the war goes badly, they want it to be, well, it's the president's fault, it's Secretary of State, Department of Defense. I never voted for a war, and of course they didn't vote for a war. So they seek power as though it's some sort of renewal and invigoration of their lives that fills up the psyche hole that they all carry around with them. But when they are asked to be responsible for that power, they run from it. So we have no debates. We have no end game. We don't know why we got in exactly. We don't know why we'll get out. A month ago, the Strait of Hormuz was open. Could we go back for a month? Gas prices would be low again. The oil would be $60 again. Free passage through the Strait of Hormuz for everybody in the world. Could we go back a month? Well, now the president, I wake up in the morning and the president says, well, we might not bother to open up the Strait of Hormuz now. It's a lot of trouble, and maybe we're just not going to worry about it. After all, we're energy sufficient here in the United States. So having closed the prime waterway through an avoidable attack in the region, now we're disclaiming it because Bush's poll numbers are down and people are unhappy. Susie Wiles' hair is on fire about the price of gasoline in the November elections. This is where we are today, in my view, Dr. T.
Well, I totally agree with that. And it's like, but it's not just oil that goes through the Straits of Hormuz. We're talking about all kinds of goods and shipping and food and fertilizer. And here we are in the
Mhm.
spring in the northern hemisphere, in Europe, and like the Netherlands, one of the bread baskets of the world. We've already bombed Ukraine into oblivion, and it was one of the bread baskets of the world. And now we're going to do the same thing, it appears, to Americans by not being able to have fertilizer and things that that are available here. I've read a lot and I've heard that, we've got this oil suffrage thing that's happened, but the next thing seems to be a food shortage because we have food insecurity in this country. And it seems as though that's going to be a global problem since the big manufacturers of food, the US, Netherlands, Ukraine, are no longer going to be providing the food. What do you think about is that a real problem that we should be looking at?
Dr. T, you and I are on the same page. And it's always this way. It's always fuel first and then it's food later. And we are on the precipice. Actually, in my view, we are already over the edge and we are descending into a remarkable global cataclysm. It is a remarkable global crisis that is on our doorstep. One of my friends and I argue about whether it'll be visible to the American people in the summer or the fall. He says the fall. I'm sure that it will be real to everybody in their living experience by the summer for reasons about not just the fuel, but the food comes second, and other commodities. Microchips and stuff, helium production from that area of the world, and much more. But it's so vastly more complicated than certainly this coming out of Washington, D.C. If the shipping started again in the morning today, if it resumed today in the Strait of Hormuz, it's too late to avert the calamity. Supply lines that take years to build have been crushed.
Wow.
Refining capacity, storage capacity, um, exploration capacity, pumping capacity of fuel all over the world. The transportation facilities ruined. It'll take years to replace it. They can't just undo their folly by stopping where they are. They've done some grave damage to the world. And I can tell you that I think what we're facing is stagflation, which is a portmanteau term. It means it's partly stagnation and partly inflation, the two worst of two worlds. A no growth economy, but prices just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. The end of last quarter, end of last year, the Washington had to reduce the reported rate of growth in the United States, the GDP of the United States in that quarter. They had to cut the rate of growth in half. When the numbers were all in, they cut their report of how fast we were growing in half. At the same time, when the February producer price index came out, just look at the February numbers and you annualize it. It was like, I believe it was 0.7% in 1 month price increases at the producer level. That's producers. Then it works its way to the consumer. But I mean, if you annualize that, that's 8% inflation just at the producer level in February. So, and that is before oil prices started climbing. That is before airlines started saying, we're going to have to cut flights badly. People are stopping vacations because they can't get transportation. They can't get through, the TSA line. So, the hospitality industry is in collapse. We've already alluded to the farmers that, they're looking at, and it's not just it's not just the desperate need that they have for fertilizers of all sorts, but the heavy farm equipment they use. It runs on diesel. That's up 45%. So even if they stopped closing the Strait of Hormuz today and reopened it to traffic, far too late. The calamity is set in motion, and we are headed into something ugly. And in my view, it's let me be mythological if I take a second for you. In Greek mythology, Prometheus was the benefactor of mankind. He stole fire from the gods. It was like light. We stole light, wisdom, ability to think. He stole it, and he paid a steep price for it. But he was Prometheus, and his name meant forethought. You think of things beforehand. And his brother was entirely different. And his brother was married to a woman named Pandora, who unleashed all the evils of the world on us when she opened the box. But it's because her husband was Epimetheus, which means afterthought. So you can either think of things beforehand and avert a crisis, or you can do what the White House and President Trump is so practiced at doing, and only think of things once it's too late to do anything about it. It's always afterthought with these guys. Always, well, Jared Kushner told me, and Steve Witkoff told me. He's got, a raft of people that could have told him a little bit about Straits of Hormuz and shutting down the global economy, doesn't consult them, and he only thinks about it afterwards. This is the mess that we're in.
Well, and it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. I think for myself and a lot of most other people these days, we don't get our news from CNN and MSNBC and Fox. We get our news from podcasters and people that are actually boots on the ground investigating this. And everybody that I listen to or that I've heard is all saying, this isn't what we voted for. This is supposed to be the peace president. This was supposed to be the person I have avoided all these wars. I stopped 7 wars. We're going to be America first. We're going to, build up America first. And now suddenly this just seemed to come out of nowhere. But then you listen to people like Catherine Austin Fitts, who's a good friend of mine, and I've had her on the show, and we've had other offline conversations about that. She feels like Trump was selected and put in place to create the control grid and all of these things, the monetary system, the oil, what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz and all that was all pre-planned to implement the control grid here in the United States of Palantir and Oracle and all the things that are happening with the big data centers that's sucking up all of our aquifer water and shutting down communities. Do you feel like she's on track with that?
Well, I mean, who would dispute that there's a lot of dark stuff going on? And
Yeah.
the deep state is completely in charge. I mean, I like to use the term the deep state because it's there's something kind of threatening about the term itself, and it shows where they're located and how deep they are. But people have to realize how widespread the deep state's operations are. I mean, it is simple to say, well, it is John Brennan and it is James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, and it's Brennan at the CIA, and that's the deep state. It goes much, much deeper than that. There's a myriad of minor petty bureaucrats all throughout government that serve the deep state, and it's a hive mind thing. Nobody has to tell them. They don't have to get orders handed down in the morning. They all serve the same purpose, just like the bees in the beehive. There's some worker bees, some tend to the queen, some fan to exhaust the refresh the temperatures, and so they all have different jobs, but they never sting each other. And the deep state works exactly like that. And just to give you one example, I mean, in the first Trump administration, there was a lieutenant colonel in his National Security Council named Vindman. And Colonel Vindman is the guy that basically started the first impeachment against President Trump. And what did he tell Congress was the problem? Well, he was flogging this impeachment effort of President Trump because President Trump did not agree with what he called the interagency consensus.
Wow.
Now, where's the interagency in the Constitution? Who gets to vote on? Who's a member? How do they make their decisions? Who profits from them? Where can I read the minutes of their meetings? How are all these things decided? And exactly what amendment of the Constitution created the interagency? He's defined the interagency ideals. But this is a description really of the deep state. This is the permanent bureaucracy that serves the interests of the global American empire, the acquisition of ever greater and greater power and authority away from the people, and then its use in all kinds of crazy and demented ways. You'll eat bugs and you'll like it. You'll own nothing and you'll like it.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
you if you run on the beach by yourself and you don't have a mask on, you're a felon. Yeah, I mean, you know this stuff better than I do.
Hold that thought right there, Charles, because we're up against a hard break here. So hold that thought. We're going to circle back to more of this great conversation we're having this morning that's really spot on. But we need to take a short break to hear from AmericaOutloud.news and their sponsors. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays the 10 Penny Files on iHeartRadio Network daily, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen anywhere in the world by going to AmericaOutloud.news and logging into their media player. If you've missed any of these great conversations that we've been having, you can find the 10 Penny Files on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, iTunes, TuneIn, iHeart Virtual Studio, and all of my platforms, which are dr10penny.com, where you go there and hover over the podcast tab. You scroll down where it says all podcasts, and you can find all of them there. We also have them on our Substack. We play it on X, Rumble, and on Instagram. And now we actually have opened a YouTube channel, so you can find the Tenpenny Files on YouTube. We've got a great message from our sponsors. Sit tight. We will be right back. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out, the heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words: many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. AmericaOutloud.news, liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Today, our conversation is with New York Times bestselling author and award-winning talk show host Charles Goyette to talk about his book, The Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole, an account of deadly folly, moral failure, war profiteering, and ruthless manipulation of the public that so applies to what's happening today. Let me tell you just a little bit more about our guest. Charles is a New York Times bestselling author and award-winning talk show host. He's appeared often on national television, including Fox and CNN. Known for his outspoken opposition to President Bush's elective Iraq war, Charles served on the National Speakers Bureau of High Frontier, a leading public policy organization. He was a news anchor with the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service and a recipient of the Army Commendation Medal for Meritorious Service. Man, that is quite a resume, Charles, and that's only the tip of the iceberg of all the things that I could say about your illustrious background. So thank you so much for being on the show today and having this great conversation about the deep state and all the things that are happening.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to cut my biographical material in half because it goes on much too long as it is. So.
Well, you know, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. And like you've already said, we really haven't declared any war because nobody wants to take the blame. How does this imbalance of war powers get us involved in everything? I mean, we've got military bases everywhere. And who really decides when America goes to war?
Well, I like to look at some of the psychological background for this, and I identify an empire of lies. I identify a really important, I call it a medical malady, and it's not in any of the standard psychiatric diagnostic manuals, but it should be because it's very dangerous. It's very deadly. And so I've given it the name combat envy. And this is a phenomenon. This is a syndrome that shows up in people that are busy selling us these wars. And just to give you a couple of very visible examples, let's start with Brian Williams. He was the primary anchor on NBC News for many years. And he flew in as a reporter to the first Gulf War on a helicopter. And after that was over, he started embellishing the tale of his adventure. And it got bigger and more harrowing. And before long, he was talking about, we got RPGs coming at us. We had a corkscrew landing. It was so dangerous. And then one hit the windshield of the copter, and and people came in, and it just got worse and worse and embellished beyond belief. And so some of the guys that were actually on the mission, they don't take reporters on the dangerous missions, but some of the guys that were on the mission finally went to Stars and Stripes, and they blew the whistle on him. They said, we were on this mission. Brian Williams was on a different mission later. There was no fire, there was no RPG coming at him, there was no threat to him at all. This is all made up. And when he was confronted with that, combat envy, I call it, when he was confronted with the truth, he didn't just take, blame for it. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I blew it. He said, I must have had a brain tumor. Maybe I have a brain tumor. I mean, it's so absurd. But to revert back to General Electric, the owner of NBC, and a major defense contractor, this is the respect they have for the people because they kept him on. So these reporters are supposed to tell us about things far away that they little understand. They're supposed to make things clear in simple terms to things they know least, but about the things they know best, their own experiences, they can lie to us. And the network keeps him on. And the chairman of the network said, well, he never criticizes the military. Well, of course he doesn't want anybody criticizing the military because that's their bread and butter. So they suspended him for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I don't really remember, and they put him on as primary anchor of MSNBC. So this is combat envy. They have a hole in their psyches. Fox had a guy for years named Wayne Simmons. He came on there for years, and he was a CIA veteran, national security, terrorism expert. And they liked him because of the warmongering things he said. It's good for ratings. It's a Fox News alert. It spikes ratings. The toxins of fear start flooding your body. The brass band starts thumping and stuff. Oh, it's a Fox News alert. And so they used him over and over again. And as long as 15 years ago, he was calling for a land and ground invasion of Iran like 15 years ago. Everything he said was off the charts, but they liked him for it. So anyway, this went on for years. And finally, some guys in the CIA got a little embarrassed by him, and they called him out. And it turned out that he'd never been in the CIA. He was no national security expert. He was a hot tub manager and a felon. And I don't remember what else was in his resume, but it was pretty thin. And so they got rid of him. But it's combat envy. And it doesn't do any harm if you meet somebody, in a bar or something, and they say, oh, I was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and they're, puffing themselves up because they feel inadequate for it. That's moderately innocent. But these people that do it on the national platforms, it's very deadly. Another one, how about Bill O'Reilly, primary warmonger guy on Fox News? Bill O'Reilly told the story about when he was in the war in the Falklands, and anybody can find him on YouTube talking about, when I lead my men in battle. Well, he never led any men in battle, and he was never in the Falklands, and he was never in the war in the Falklands, despite his repeated contention about it. And I'm in a war situation in the Falklands one time when I had to drag my camera in, whatever. He was never in the Falklands, but it got worse than that. He started talking about, well, I've seen nuns get shot in the head. I think he was talking about the civil disorder in Central America back in the 80s, but he didn't see those either. It was, he'd seen photos, but you saw the Zapruder film, Dr. T. So would you come out and say, oh, I was there, I was a witness to Kennedy's assassination? I mean, it's just nonsense. And it got worse than that. I haven't read his book about killing Kennedy, but I am told reliably that in killing Kennedy, he says he was on the front porch in Florida of a kind of an Oswald associate, kind of a crazy gray image of the nexus between the CIA and Oswald, when a guy by the name George de Mohrenschildt, a CIA guy, blew his head off with a shotgun. He said, well, I rang the doorbell and then heard the shotgun blast or something to that effect. The only thing is he wasn't in Florida. He wasn't there. He was in another state. He was in Texas. Somebody came up with a recorded phone call of him calling from the newsroom where he actually worked in Texas about some other story. So all of this stuff is made up, but it's combat envy. And it's so pronounced in the people that thump their chests and try to drive us into these wars. So that's, just part of the media's complicity about it. But it's very dangerous. And everything these people say has to be corroborated because it's not prima facie true.
Most people independently don't do a lot of independent deep diving research. They just don't. I mean, I think that when Twitter first came about and the 24 characters that, you had to learn how to communicate in 24 characters really shortened our attention spans. And now we've got TikTok and, the new algorithms on Instagram are like, if it's longer than 2 minutes, people won't watch it, or they'll just scroll through to something else. And so when you've got people that you're supposed to trust and you think are doing deep dives, like you mentioned Brian Williams and Bill O'Reilly, and I would throw Hannity into that thing right there.
Sure.
I mean, who do you listen to? And how do you know if any of it's real?
Well, the only thing people can do is to question everything, and when they're told something by somebody they even like or they have a sense of trust in, hold it in abeyance. But you can accept it and operate on it, but hold it in abeyance. Everything should be subject to verification. But you need to find people that are reliable and stuff. You have a huge following of people that have learned to rely on what you say. I have a following of people that have learned to rely on what I say because I'm doing the work that they're raising their families. They're trying to earn a living. They're trying to, put air in the tires and fix the car. They've got lives to, they don't have the time that I have or that you have to deep dive into these things. And so they develop kind of a set of trusted people, and that's a good place to start. And but it ain't in the mainstream. It ain't Sean Hannity who told us over and over again, oh, Iraq's missing weapons of mass destruction. I think they secreted them. They smuggled them into Syria. I mean, it's nonsense. The stuff is nonsense that these people say. So people need to learn who they can trust through repeated experience, and always try to corroborate when they have time.
You have a lot of historical examples in your book, Empire of Lies, which is really, really good and really informative because it's all right there, all squeezed in together. And we American people seem to end up like the victims of all of this stuff. And right now it seems as though Congress is doing nothing except kind of finger pointing and like yelling. And we're approaching the midterms, and there's a lot of conversation and discussion about, because the margins are already pretty thin in terms of the Republicans, and that, what are we going to end up with after the midterms this time? I'm not sure that it matters. I mean, the uniparty has taken over everything, but Congress seems to be doing nothing to intervene with all of the problems that are happening here in this country right now, while Trump is just running rogue around the world doing the things that he's doing. What can Americans do? Is there anything that we can do to take back our constitutional republic?
Well, my answer to that is never very satisfying to people, but I'm trying to be realistic about it. First of all, the backstory is that empires, like the global American empire, and you talked about the proliferation of our bases and our military presence around the globe, empires end up very often the exact same way, and it's called imperial overstretch. And the might of the empire, the might of the American people, the might of the British Empire, the Roman Empire was a result of their productivity. I mean, they were rich, and it was because they were rich that they could afford to have an empire and go into foreign lands and stuff. They should have done it perhaps, but that's what enabled them to do it because they were prosperous. They had a free economy, a relatively free economy, and the people prospered. And then the state creamed what it could, skimmed off what it could, and went off in its foreign adventurism, not on behalf of the people, but on behalf of the Caesars and the kings and the presidents. So what they do is when they start to lose, an empire starts to lose its dominance, when it starts to lose its global hegemony, new competitors arise for markets and stuff, and their circumstances on the face of the globe is starting to wane. They don't understand that this is a problem that is caused by their waning productivity, by their growing impoverishment of their circumstances. The people aren't as prosperous, growth is slowing. They look at these problems not at the core of what made them powerful in the first place, their wealth, the productivity of the free people. They look at it as a challenge to their global military authority. And so they divert even more money from the productive sectors of the economy to sustain the empire. And this is exactly what we are doing now. So we have military adventurism all over the globe, grabbing countries. I understand that, Cuba's next and so on. We're grabbing countries, we're depleting the people's prosperity. We spend $1 trillion on the war state right now. which is probably more than I don't even keep up with it anymore. The next 7 or 8 countries, probably 7 countries combined, we spend more than that, but it's not enough. Now they need a $200 billion supplemental appropriation for the war in Iraq. Now President Trump wants, instead of a $1 trillion war budget, he wants a $1.5 trillion budget. Where is he going to get the money? We're $39 trillion in debt that we cannot pay, and that's only the visible portion of the debt that is visible, as you know, above the waterline. Much bigger is the hidden portion of the debt, the unfunded liabilities, and yet they want to divert more money. Historically, it matches the imperial overstretch model, that they divert more money from the productive people, from the health and the prosperity of the American people. They divert it to the war machine, and pretty soon they've stretched the rubber band so tight that the productivity evaporates and the empire collapses anyway. This is where we are. So when you say what can be done about it, all I can really tell you, I mean, this is a motion that's in progress right now. This imperial overstretch is it, and it's an end game motion. It doesn't end nicely. So my only answer, and I think it's one you'll certainly agree with, is the best we can do is massive decentralization of our lives, decentralization of power and authority from the central government, return to the states, to the basic unit of government, to the county, decentralization of our education, decentralization of all of these institutions that want to, I have made the difference in my state legislature in state issues, because you could go down there, take 2 or 3 people and knock on a few doors and they're afraid you're going to do something. You can make a difference locally. But if you try to make a difference in Washington, D.C., it takes millions of dollars and it takes a heck of a lot of people. So we need to decentralize everything, because decentralize our food production, decentralize our energy supplies, decentralize everything. And that's the only way we can cushion the blow of this imperial overstretch, in my view.
I heard somewhere recently that the debt is really closer to $55 trillion. $55 trillion is where we are, which is impossible. It's just an impossible number. And I also heard that there's a movement in the states to try to get the sheriffs put underneath ICE. And the sheriff at a local level is the highest authority of the land, and people really don't take advantage of making nice and getting to know their sheriff and getting them on our side of taking back our freedoms that are local, because all politics is local. And so I agree with you that we've got to get back to what's happening in our own neighborhoods, which can be a little bit frightening, because of the division between the left and the right, which, we've got uniparty in DC, but we've got left and right on our streets, across the street, of how that's going to happen. And you've done so much research into your Empire of Lies book that you've really laid out an incredible plan of history. When you were doing, and we've got just a few minutes left in our show, but which I think you and I are so much on the same page. I think we could talk for days. I think we could go on.
No question.
And when you were doing the research to put this together, you're already very knowledgeable and know a lot about history. What do you think some of your biggest surprises were, that as you dug things out, and the biggest surprises in your research that we can apply to what's happening now, so we can take a different direction?
Well, maybe it's not a surprise, but it should have been a surprise to all of us, and it was certainly a major disappointment to me, was to see how quickly a big section of Trump supporters of the MAGA movement were willing to change their tune when they elected him on a no regime change wars, America for American, we need to rebuild our country and our prosperity and stuff. And when all of a sudden he started talking about the different countries, and we want to take this one, and we want to take that one, and it was always a might makes right thing. I was on a radio show recently where the fellow said, "Well, I liked what we did with Maduro," and I said, "Well, do you like it if China kidnaps the leader of Taiwan or the Philippines? I mean, do you want to live in a Mad Max world in which everything descends into chaos and there's no rule of law?" So I was really disappointed in the MAGA supporters, but all it took was a little chest thumping, and yeah, by gosh, we got to go in there. Yeah, we'll show them a lesson. We'll take them. And how quickly, and it certainly divided MAGA, in my view. It didn't take all of the people, the MAGA supporters, but it took a big chunk of them that went unthinkingly along with this nonsense. And So, in my view, the Make America First movement is over. It's totally finished. Cataclysm, a debacle is coming for the party politically in the fall. Um, if you thought Biden was bad, or you thought Kamala Harris was a disaster or a kind of a moron, or if you thought, if I mean, this divide in the MAGA movement, the ending of this coalition. This coalition is totally dead, and the ending of this coalition is going to bequeath us something really, really bad when the other guys take over. That's where we're going, and who can we blame for it? People have to look at how they've been betrayed and how their hopes for electing a president that would take care of America first has flip flopped on them. That's my view.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's a little bit frightening looking ahead to the next election. Like, who's going to go step into that gap? Is it going to be JD Vance? Is it going to be Vivek? Is it, who's it going to be? And I think all the American people are just sort of tired of all of it. So
Well, good.
I think they are. The last minute here that we've got together here, what would you say on your book, The Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole? Give us a 1-minute summary of what you want to leave people with today and why people should get your book and read it.
Well, it's not really a work. It looks as though it's a work of history, and I've recounted historical things, and there's a fair amount of that. But I'm trying to show the trajectory where we're headed. The memory hole, fragments from the memory hole, that comes from 1984 by George Orwell. And when they wanted to torture people, this all-encompassing, all-powerful state, when they wanted to torture somebody, they took them to the Ministry of Love. And when they wanted to rewrite history, which they did all the time and which goes on here, they went to the Ministry of Truth to rewrite history. Well, we live in a Ministry of Truth era, and all of our history is being rewritten. So the American people don't know where we're going. And when these things come up, like the Iran situation and the next one down the pike and the one after that, if we're still around, they don't have anything to refer to. They don't see the trajectory. So I try to explain these things in terms of, here's where we are, and here's how we got here, and here's the modus operandi that the deep state uses to stampede you into their next objective or their next war. And here is how to value the truth instead of ignoring the truth. Here's how to hold them accountable and value the truth. So that's the point of the book. And nobody can read that book and come away without their eyes being open to a lot of different things about where they're stampeding us today.
Well, I would really totally agree with that. And it's really well written. It's informative, and it just sort of draws you in as you read it. It's a page turner that I think is really, really good. So, and everybody that's listening to this, because we're out of time for today, but everybody that's listening to this, we collect all of the books from all of the authors that we interview on this show and have conversations with. And you can find all of their books at bookstore.drtenpenny.com so that you can find them easily. You don't have to search all of those 3 million books on Amazon. They're all put together in one place at bookstore.drtenpenny.com. So, Charles, I want to thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for being a great guest on our show today. And for everybody else that has been following us and is here today, thank you so much. We'll see you again tomorrow or the next time on the Tenpenny Files. And right here on AmericaOutloud.news and iHeartRadio. You can also find it at drtenpenny.com and all of the podcasts that you subscribe to. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Goodbye and God bless.